6th June 1944, Normandy. A German convoy rolls down a rural road. Lieutenant Winters raises his hand, wait for the signal to fire. But Sergeant Bill Guarnere does not wait. His Thompson submachine gun roars first, ripping through the enemy column. Why did he disobey a direct order? Because to him, every German was the man who killed his brother. This is the story of William Wild Bill Guarnere, a man driven not by ideology, but by rage, a paratrooper whose thirst for vengeance shaped every bullet he fired, every grenade he threw, and ultimately the price he paid in blood. William Guarnere was born on 28 April 1923 in South Philadelphia, the heart of an Italian immigrant neighborhood where 10 children shared cramped rooms and survival meant loyalty to family above all else. His father worked the docks, his mother stretched every dollar. Bill grew up fast, sharp-tongued and fearless, the kind of kid who settled arguments with fists and earned respect through grit. But one person mattered more than anyone, his older brother Henry. Henry was calm where Bill was fire, steady where Bill was reckless. He enlisted first, joining the 1st Armored Division as a medic, a healer, not a killer. Bill admired that. Henry represented everything decent about the war effort: duty, sacrifice, compassion. Then came the telegram. Monte Cassino, Italy, 1944. Henry was killed in action. No details, no body to bury, just a name added to a list of thousands. For Bill Guarnere, the war stopped being abstract. It became personal. Every swastika was Henry's murderer. Every Wehrmacht soldier deserved Henry's fate. Vengeance was not a choice, it was oxygen. On 31st August 1942, months before Henry's death, but already burning to fight, Bill walked into a recruitment office and volunteered for the paratroopers, the most dangerous, most elite unit the Army offered. No one forced him. No draft notice arrived. He chose the hardest path because anything less felt like cowardice. The 101st Airborne Division sent him to Camp Toccoa, Georgia, where hell began before the enemy ever appeared. Captain Herbert Sobel ran training like a tyrant. 5-mile runs up Currahee Mountain before dawn. Full pack, full uniform, no water breaks. Men vomited. Men collapsed. Sobel screamed louder. He demanded perfection and punished everything short of it. Most recruits hated him. Bill Guarnere thrived. Pain was fuel. Exhaustion was weakness leaving the body. Every blister, every aching muscle brought him closer to killing the men who took Henry. His aggression did not go unnoticed. Instructors saw a soldier who attacked training exercises with unsettling intensity, flanking, attacking from the side during mock ambushes, charging enemy positions without waiting for covering fire, always first through the door. His nickname emerged naturally: Wild Bill. Not wild as in reckless, but wild as in untamed rage kept barely under control. Lieutenant Dick Winters, who would later command Easy Company, described him in post-war memoirs as a natural killer, a man who did not need orders to destroy the enemy, only permission. By the time Bill Guarnere earned his jump wings and joined Easy Company, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, he was no longer the South Philadelphia street fighter. He was a weapon pointed at Germany, loaded with grief and ready to fire. But grief alone does not win wars. Discipline does. Tactics do. Leadership does. The question was not whether Bill could kill. It was whether he could channel that fury into something more than suicide. The answer would come screaming out of the sky over Normandy, when chaos replaced every plan, and survival meant trusting the man beside you more than the hatred inside you. The night of 5th June 1944, Bill Guarnere sat inside a C-47 transport plane, legs dangling over the drop zone, adrenaline drowning out the engine roar. Around him, Easy Company, men he had trained with, bled with, trusted, checked parachutes one last time. Below, Normandy waited in darkness. Somewhere down there, Germans occupied French soil. Somewhere down there, Bill's war would finally begin. At 0100 hours, anti-aircraft fire erupted. Tracers ripped through the fuselage. The plane lurched. The jump light turned green too early. Pilots, desperate to escape the flak, shoved paratroopers out wherever they could. Bill leapt into chaos. His parachute opened. Then the wind scattered Easy Company across 20 square miles of hedgerow country, far from their designated drop zones. He landed hard near Saint-Mère-Église, alone in enemy territory. No officers, no radio, just the distant crack of rifle fire and the knowledge that every shadow could be Wehrmacht. The bocage, Normandy's ancient hedgerows, turned the countryside into a maze of 6-foot-tall earthen walls topped with dense brush, limiting visibility to 20 yards. Perfect ambush terrain. Bill moved carefully, using his cricket clicker to identify friendlies, until he linked up with Lieutenant Winters and a handful of Easy Company survivors at dawn. That morning, Winters led a small patrol down a narrow road when they spotted a German convoy. Trucks, troops, supplies, heading toward the beach defenses. Winters raised his fist, the signal to hold fire, let the convoy pass deeper into the kill zone. Standard ambush doctrine: wait for the entire column, maximize casualties, minimize risk. Bill Guarnere did not wait. His Thompson roared. The lead truck exploded in a hail of .45 caliber rounds. Chaos erupted. Germans dove for cover. The rest of Easy Company had no choice but to open fire immediately, turning a calculated ambush into a desperate close-quarters firefight. Winters was furious, but the enemy was dead. Bill did not apologize. To him, hesitation meant another German lived to kill another American. Henry did not get a second chance. Neither would they. If this story of courage under fire grips you, subscribe and hit like for more accounts from the 101st Airborne. Help the algorithm reach more people who value real history. Hours later, Easy Company received urgent orders. German artillery at Brécourt Manor was tearing apart Utah Beach. 4 105mm howitzers dug into hedgerow positions, protected by at least 50 Wehrmacht infantry and interconnected trenches. The beach landings, thousands of men, depended on silencing those guns. Lieutenant Winters assembled 13 paratroopers, 13 against 50, with no armor, no air support, and ammunition running low. The plan was surgical. Use the hedgerows for cover. Assault each gun position sequentially. Suppress the infantry with coordinated fire and maneuver. Textbook flanking, attacking from the side to hit the enemy's weak point. Bill Guarnere understood immediately. While others provided covering fire, he would move through the hedgerows, emerge behind the German trenches, and kill them from an angle they did not expect. The assault began. Winters led the first team directly at the nearest howitzer. Machine gun fire tore the air. Private Popeye Wynn fell wounded. Bill, moving unseen through the bocage, appeared on the German flank and opened fire with his Thompson at point-blank range. The trench exploded in blood and dirt. The first gun fell silent. They moved to the second position. Same tactic. More grenades, more German bodies. Bill did not hesitate, did not flinch, did not stop until all 4 guns were destroyed and the surviving Wehrmacht fled into the fields. Casualties: Easy Company lost 4 wounded, 0 dead. German losses: at least 15 confirmed killed, dozens more wounded or captured, 4 artillery pieces permanently disabled. The entire action took less than 2 hours. Brécourt Manor became a case study taught at the United States Military Academy at West Point, a perfect example of small unit tactics, leadership under fire, and audacity overcoming numerical superiority. Bill Guarnere earned promotion to sergeant, taking command of 2nd Platoon. He also received the Silver Star, one of only 2 awarded to Easy Company soldiers during the entire war. The other went to Lynn Buck Compton. The citation praised his conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity. It did not mention that his gallantry was fueled by rage, or that every German he killed carried his brother's face. Normandy taught Bill something unexpected. Fury worked. Controlled aggression applied with tactical precision saved lives, American lives. The beast inside him was not a liability. It was an asset as long as someone like Winters pointed it in the right direction. But war does not stay controlled. Terrain shifts, plans collapse, and sooner or later, the bullet with your name arrives. No matter how fast you move, how angry you are, or how many enemies you kill first. By September 1944, Easy Company had survived Normandy and liberated towns across France. Bill Guarnere had killed more Germans than he could count, earned his stripes, and proven that controlled violence wins firefights. But the war was not over. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery had a plan, bold, ambitious, and fatally flawed, called Operation Market Garden. The objective: drop 3 Allied airborne divisions deep behind German lines in Holland, seize a series of bridges across the Rhine, and punch a narrow corridor straight into the industrial heart of Germany. If it worked, the war would end by Christmas. If it failed, thousands of paratroopers would be cut off, surrounded, and slaughtered. Easy Company boarded the C-47s on 17 September, destination Eindhoven and the road to Arnhem. The jump went smoothly, no flak, clear skies, accurate drop zones. The 101st Airborne landed and secured their bridges, but further north, British paratroopers at Arnhem were being annihilated by unexpected SS Panzer divisions. The grand plan stalled. The narrow supply corridor, nicknamed Hell's Highway, became a killing ground. German counterattacks isolated Allied units, cutting roads and severing communications. Easy Company was ordered to hold a position south of the Rhine River, a flat stretch of Dutch farmland the men grimly nicknamed the Island. It was not an island in any geographic sense, just a piece of ground surrounded by enemies on 3 sides, with the river at their backs, and no easy retreat. For weeks, Easy dug in, patrolled, and traded fire with Wehrmacht troops dug in to the opposite tree line. Rain turned the fields to mud. Supplies arrived sporadically. The mission became simple: survive and wait for orders that never seemed to come. Bill Guarnere hated waiting. Waiting meant thinking. Thinking meant remembering Henry. Action was better. On 5th October, he borrowed a Dutch civilian's motorcycle without asking and rode toward the front to scout German positions on his own initiative. No one ordered this patrol. No one authorized the motorcycle. Bill simply decided reconnaissance was needed, so he went. A German sniper decided otherwise. The bullet struck Bill's right leg, shattering his tibia just below the knee. Shrapnel from a secondary explosion, possibly a mine or mortar round, tore into his buttocks and lower back. He collapsed. Medics dragged him back under fire, patched the wounds, and shipped him to a field hospital in Belgium, then across the channel to a military hospital in England. Doctors said 6 months minimum recovery. Bill said no. His war was not finished. His brothers, his Easy Company family, were still in Holland, still fighting, still dying. Lying in a hospital bed while they bled was unacceptable. So one night in late October, Bill Guarnere walked out. He disguised his leg cast under loose trousers, forged movement papers, hitchhiked to the coast, talked his way onto a supply ship, and went AWOL, absent without leave, back to the front. When he limped into Easy Company's position, half-healed and grinning, his platoon cheered. Lieutenant Winters did not. Deserting a hospital was a court-martial offense. Disobeying medical orders endangered the entire unit if Bill collapsed in combat. Winters had no choice but to report it up the chain of command. Bill was formally charged, reduced in rank from sergeant back to private, and faced the possibility of a military prison sentence. Then paperwork saved him. In the chaos of Market Garden's collapse, with entire units scattered and records lost, someone, no one ever admitted who, misplaced Bill's court-martial file. The charges vanished. By November, with the front line stabilizing and Easy Company rotating to rest and refit in Mormillon, France, Bill was quietly reinstated to his former rank. No trial, no punishment, just an unspoken agreement. The Army needed men like Wild Bill more than it needed bureaucratic discipline. Bill arrived in Mormillon on 10th December 1944. His legs still ached. The shrapnel wounds had not fully healed. But he was back with Easy Company, back with the men who mattered, back in the fight. For the first time since Henry's death, Bill Guarnere felt something other than rage. He felt loyalty. These men were not replacements for his brother. They were something else, something harder to name. Family forged under fire, worth deserting a hospital for, worth dying for. He had no idea how soon that loyalty would be tested. 6 days later, Germany would launch the largest counteroffensive of the war, and Easy Company would be thrown into frozen hell with almost no ammunition, no winter clothing, and no hope of relief. Bill Guarnere's vengeance quest was about to collide with something bigger than hatred, the choice between killing another German and saving an American life. 16th December 1944. Bill Guarnere was in Mormillon, France, drinking hot coffee and enjoying the first real rest Easy Company had seen in months. His legs still throbbed from the Holland wound, but he could walk, he could fight, and most importantly, he was surrounded by his men. Then the alarm sounded. Reports flooded in from the Ardennes forest, 80 miles northeast. A massive German counteroffensive had smashed through thinly held American lines, creating a bulge in Allied defenses that threatened to split the entire front. 3 German armies, over 200,000 troops, supported by 1,000 tanks and assault guns, had attacked in total secrecy, exploiting fog and forest to achieve complete surprise. The objective was audacious: drive west to Antwerp, cut off Allied supply lines, encircle 4 entire armies, and force a negotiated peace before the Soviets reached Berlin. American units were retreating in chaos. Entire regiments were surrounded. The situation was catastrophic. The 101st Airborne received emergency orders: move immediately to the Belgian crossroads town of Bastogne and hold it at all costs. Bastogne was not strategically important because of its size, fewer than 4,000 civilians, but because 7 major roads converged there. Control Bastogne, control the entire region's movement. Lose Bastogne, lose the ability to counterattack. Easy Company loaded onto trucks in full combat gear, leaving behind winter uniforms, heavy weapons, and most of their ammunition because there was no time to pack properly. They arrived on 19th December to find Bastogne already surrounded. German panzer divisions had swept past the town, encircling it completely, cutting all roads. The 101st Airborne, roughly 15,000 men, faced perhaps 45,000 Germans in a tightening noose. On 22nd December, German officers approached under a white flag and demanded surrender. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, acting commander of the 101st, sent back a one-word reply that became legend: nuts. The siege continued. The weather turned brutal. Temperatures plunged to -15 degrees Celsius. Snow blanketed the Ardennes, 2 feet deep in places, transforming the forested hills into a white maze where every tree could hide a German machine gun nest. Easy Company dug foxholes in frozen ground, exhausting work that left men soaked in sweat that froze the moment they stopped moving. Frostbite claimed toes, fingers, entire feet. Trench-foot rotted flesh inside boots. Men urinated on their hands to warm them enough to pull triggers. Supply was nightmare logistics. With roads cut, everything, ammunition, food, medical supplies, had to be dropped by C-47 cargo planes flying through German flak. Pilots braved anti-aircraft fire to push supply bundles out cargo doors, hoping wind would not scatter them into German hands. Rationing became severe. 1 K ration per day shared between 2 men. Coffee was cold. Water froze in canteens. Soldiers wrapped their feet in parachute silk scavenged from supply drops, desperate for any insulation against the cold. The terrain favored defense but magnified suffering. The Ardennes was dense second-growth forest broken by small farming villages, Foy, Bizori, Racham, each a cluster of stone houses and barns that became fortified strongpoints. Open fields between villages became killing grounds where movement meant death. Both sides dug in, trading artillery fire, launching small raids, bleeding slowly. Casualty figures remain disputed. Estimates for total Allied losses in the Battle of the Bulge range from 80,000 to over 100,000 killed, wounded, or missing. German losses perhaps 70,000 to 100,000. Bastogne alone cost thousands on both sides, exact numbers lost to the fog of war and incomplete records. Bill Guarnere thrived in this frozen hell. While others succumbed to despair or cold, he moved through the snow with savage purpose. Every German patrol was another chance to kill the enemy. Every firefight was Henry's revenge multiplied. His men watched him stalk the tree line at dawn, Thompson ready, hunting Germans like prey. He did not wait for orders to engage. If he saw field gray uniforms, he fired. His aggression was contagious, infectious. When morale collapsed under cold and hunger, Bill's fury kept 2nd Platoon fighting. What would you have done in his place? Stayed safe or charged forward? Comment below, subscribe, and hit like so you don't miss Wild Bill's climax. But his personal vendetta was merging with tactical necessity. Easy Company was assigned to assault Foy, a village held by German forces using stone buildings as bunkers. The attack required coordination, suppressing fire, and infantry advancing under machine gun crossfire. Bill led his platoon forward through waist-deep snow, bullets snapping overhead, men falling wounded. He did not think about revenge in those moments. He thought about the soldier beside him, the next piece of cover, the German position that needed flanking. Fury had become discipline. Hatred had become leadership. Easy Company took Foy after brutal house-to-house fighting. German defenders retreated to nearby woods. American casualties mounted, killed, wounded, evacuated. Replacements arrived with no combat experience, terrified and useless, until veterans like Bill grabbed them by the collars and taught them how to survive the next 5 minutes. The line held, barely. Bastogne remained in American hands, but the cost was paid in frozen corpses stacked like cordwood because the ground was too hard to dig graves. Civilians trapped inside Bastogne suffered their own nightmare. Families huddled in basements while artillery shells demolished their homes. German propaganda broadcasts promised relief if Americans surrendered, a lie designed to break morale. Some villagers collaborated, hoping to survive. Others hid American wounded in cellars, risking execution if discovered. War does not distinguish between soldiers and bystanders when the front line runs through your kitchen. By early January 1945, Patton's Third Army had finally broken through the encirclement, relieving Bastogne. But the 101st Airborne was not pulled out. Instead, they received new orders: attack northeast, push the Germans back, retake lost ground. Easy Company moved into positions southwest of Foy, preparing for the next assault. The snow kept falling, the cold kept killing, and somewhere in those frozen woods, German artillery crews were plotting coordinates, adjusting elevation, preparing a barrage that would change Bill Guarnere's life forever. The vengeance quest that began in a South Philadelphia telegram was about to end in a foxhole outside a Belgian village no one had heard of. And the question was not whether Bill would kill more Germans. It was whether he would finally understand what mattered more than killing. January 1945. Easy Company held a position on a snow-covered hillside southwest of Foy, Belgium. The village was secure, but German forces still controlled the surrounding woods, and both sides knew the fight was not over. Bill Guarnere moved between foxholes, checking his men, redistributing ammunition, cracking jokes to keep morale from freezing solid like everything else. He had been at war for 18 months. He had killed dozens of Germans. Henry's death still burned, but something had shifted. The men around him, cold, exhausted, scared, mattered more than the next enemy corpse. Sergeant Joe Toye was one of those men, a fellow Easy Company veteran, tough as railroad steel, loyal to the core.
He and Bill were not just soldiers in the same unit, they were brothers forged in Normandy hedgerows, Holland mud, and Bastogne snow. They had saved each other's lives more times than any could count. That bond, built under fire, was stronger than blood. The German artillery barrage came without warning. One moment, silence. The next, the air tore apart in a screaming roar of incoming shells. High explosive rounds detonated across the hillside in rapid succession, calculated fire designed to saturate a grid square and obliterate everything inside it. Soldiers dove into foxholes. Snow erupted in black geysers of dirt and shrapnel. The concussion waves slammed chests, burst eardrums, turned the world into a shaking nightmare of noise and death. Joe Toye did not make it to cover in time. A shell exploded close, too close. Shrapnel tore through his right leg, severing arteries, shattering bone. He collapsed in the snow, screaming, bleeding out. Red spread fast across white. Men nearby were pinned down by continuing fire, unable to move without getting killed themselves. Bill Guarnere saw Joe fall. Every instinct screamed at him to stay low, wait for the barrage to end, survive. But Joe had seconds, not minutes. Staying low meant watching a brother die. Bill made his choice. He crawled out of his foxhole into the barrage.
Shells continued to fall. Shrapnel whined overhead. Bill low-crawled through snow toward Joe, moving as fast as frozen ground allowed, expecting every second to be his last. He reached Toye, grabbed him under the arms, and started dragging him back toward cover. Joe was heavy, dead weight, plus soaked uniform, plus full combat gear. Bill's wounded leg from Holland screamed in pain. He ignored it. 1 foot back, another, pulling, dragging, 10 yards to safety, then 5. The shell landed 3 yards away. Bill never heard it coming. The explosion lifted both men off the ground and slammed them back down into the snow. Joe Toye's right leg, what remained of it, was gone below the knee. Bill Guarnere's right leg was destroyed above the knee, shredded by white-hot metal fragments that shattered his femur and obliterated muscle, tendon, and artery in an instant. Pain beyond description, blood everywhere, both men screaming. Medics appeared, Eugene Doc Rowe and others, crawling through continuing fire to reach them. Tourniquets, morphine, frantic hands trying to stop arterial bleeding that would not stop. Joe and Bill were loaded onto stretchers and carried back through the snow, leaving red trails. Field surgeons at the battalion aid station took one look at Bill's leg and knew. The damage was catastrophic. Bone fragments, severed femoral artery, massive tissue loss. Amputation above the knee was the only option. Bill was unconscious when they cut. Joe Toye lost his leg on the same operating table. 2 easy company sergeants, 2 brothers, 2 right legs gone in the same barrage while trying to save each other. Bill Guarnere woke up days later in a military hospital, minus his leg and plus a Purple Heart, his second. He also received 3 Bronze Stars for valor in separate actions and retained his Silver Star from Brécourt Manor, making him one of the most decorated soldiers in Easy Company's history. Only one other man, Lynn Buck Compton, earned a Silver Star in the entire company during the war. The official citation praised his extraordinary heroism under fire and his selfless disregard for personal safety in the face of overwhelming enemy action. It did not mention that he had disobeyed survival instinct or that the decision to save Joe Toye was more important than every German he had killed in Henry's name. In that frozen moment, dragging a wounded man through artillery fire, Bill Guarnere's war changed. It was no longer about vengeance, it was about the man beside him. Loyalty had replaced rage. Brotherhood had become stronger than hatred. And the price? His leg, his combat career, his ability to walk unaided ever again, was one he would have paid 100 times over if it meant Joe Toye survived. Both men did survive,
Joe was evacuated to England, then the States. Bill followed weeks later after additional surgeries to prevent infection. Their war, the shooting, the killing, the fighting, was over. But the battle to rebuild shattered bodies and make sense of what they had become would take decades. The terrain and climate had amplified the chaos that day. Snow made movement slow, made blood loss faster, made evacuation harder. The forested hills gave German artillery observers perfect firing positions. Cold reduced the effectiveness of morphine and increased shock. Every factor, tactical, environmental, medical, worked against survival. That Bill and Joe lived was not luck. It was medics risking their lives in continued fire, surgeons working miracles with primitive tools, and two men refusing to quit even when their bodies were destroyed. Bill Guarnere left Bastogne missing a leg, but carrying something more valuable, the knowledge that some things matter more than revenge. He had started the war wanting to kill Germans for Henry. He ended it willing to die for Joe. That transformation, from vengeance to loyalty, from rage to love, was the real story of Wild Bill. The medals just made it official. March 1945. Bill Guarnere returned to the United States on a hospital ship, 21 years old and missing his right leg. The war in Europe was not over. Germany would not surrender until May, but Bill's part in it had ended in a Belgian snowfield. He was processed through a series of military hospitals, fitted with a prosthetic leg, taught to walk again through months of painful physical therapy, and finally discharged with full disability benefits and a stack of medals he rarely looked at. South Philadelphia welcomed him home a hero. Parades, newspaper articles, strangers shaking his hand, thanking him for his service. Bill hated it. He was not a hero. He was a man who survived when others did not. Henry was still dead. Joe Toye was still crippled. Dozens of Easy Company men were buried in European cemeteries, their families left with folded flags and hollow condolences. The praise felt obscene. He tried the prosthetic leg for a few months, then abandoned it. The fit was poor, the pain constant, the mechanical knee joint unreliable. Crutches were simpler, faster, more honest. Bill moved through the world on aluminum sticks and one good leg, refusing pity, refusing to slow down, refusing to become a tragic figure. He worked a series of jobs: factory work, warehouse labor, anything that paid and did not require explanations about the missing limb. He married Frances, a woman who loved the man he was, not the soldier he had been. They had 2 sons. Bill taught them to fight, to stand up, to never back down. The same lessons South Philadelphia had taught him. But the wars stayed inside him. Nightmares, anger at small provocations, the inability to explain to anyone who had not been there what Bastogne cold felt like, what artillery sounded like, what it meant to watch friends die. Post-traumatic stress was not yet a diagnosis in the 1940s and 1950s. It was just something veterans carried silently, drinking it away or working it away or suffering it away in isolation.
What saved Bill was the men who understood without words. Easy Company reunions became sacred rituals, annual gatherings where veterans shared stories, drank too much, laughed at dark jokes, and remembered the dead without needing to explain why it mattered. Joe Toye was there every time, limping on his own prosthetic, swapping insults with Bill like they were still freezing in foxholes. The bond forged in combat did not fade. If anything, it deepened. In 2007, 62 years after Bastogne, Bill Guarnere and Edward "Babe" Heffron, another Easy Company veteran, co-authored a memoir titled Brothers in Battle, Best of Friends. The book was raw, profane, and brutally honest. Bill did not glorify war. He did not claim to be a hero. He simply told the truth. Easy Companies survived because they loved each other more than they feared death. The brotherhood mattered more than the battles. Loyalty mattered more than medals. The book found an audience hungry for authenticity.
HBO's Band of Brothers miniseries, released in 2001, had dramatized Easy Company's story and made Bill a recognizable figure. Actor Frank John Hughes portrayed him as aggressive, tough, loyal. The series took liberties, compressed timelines, invented dialogue, simplified complex events for television pacing. But the core facts were verified through 101st Airborne Division archives, veteran interviews, and historical records. Bill appreciated that the series honored his brothers, even if Hollywood cleaned up the language and made war look more heroic than it felt. If Wild Bill inspired you, subscribe now, hit like, and turn on notifications for more true stories from World War II. On 8 March 2014, William Wild Bill Guarnere died in a Philadelphia hospital at age 90. He was buried with full military honors. Statues commemorating Easy Company veterans were erected in Philadelphia. A memorial fund was established to support disabled veterans, men and women dealing with the same struggles Bill had faced 70 years earlier. His legacy was not the Germans he killed or the medals he earned. It was the lesson encoded in his final act of combat. Loyalty matters more than vengeance. Bill went to war to kill the men who took his brother. He came home understanding that saving a friend, even at the cost of his own body, was worth more than 1,000 dead enemies.
Military doctrine absorbed the lessons of men like Bill Guarnere. Airborne training emphasizes unit cohesion above individual skill. Soldiers are taught to trust the man beside them more than their own survival instinct, because that trust, that willingness to die for each other, is what wins battles when plans collapse and chaos reigns. Easy Company proved it at Brécourt Manor, Bastogne, and 100 unnamed firefights. 13 men can defeat 50 if they move as one. A crippled sergeant can save a friend if loyalty overpowers fear. But Bill's story also carries a warning. Rage is useful fuel, but terrible navigation. Vengeance can drive a man to extraordinary acts, but it cannot sustain him when the shooting stops. The soldiers who survived the war intact, mentally, emotionally, were the ones who found something beyond hatred to fight for. Bill was fortunate. He found brotherhood before the war consumed him entirely. Not every soldier does. Controversies remain. Casualty figures from Bastogne are still disputed. Fog of war, incomplete records, propaganda inflation on both sides. Some veterans disputed details in Band of Brothers, claiming events were dramatized or misattributed. Historians continue to argue over tactical decisions, command failures, and whether the Battle of the Bulge was Germany's last gasp or a near-catastrophic Allied intelligence failure. Bill did not care about those arguments. He knew what he saw, who he fought beside, and what it cost. William Guarnere walked into war carrying his brother's death like a weapon. He limped out carrying his brother's lives like a burden and a blessing. The transformation from Wild Bill, the killer fueled by rage, to Bill Guarnere, the man who crawled through artillery fire to save a friend, is the story of what combat does to a human soul when love proves stronger than hate. 80 years later, his lesson endures. The enemy you kill is forgotten, but the friend you save becomes eternal.